Recently, I was just watching a video on social injustice warriors channel SIJ's or SIW's channel SJW's channel, whatever you want to call it. And he was talking about the invasion of the outsiders. Basically, he was talking. Basically, it was the third part, I guess you could say, in a trilogy of videos he was doing on Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and then of course the Outsiders kind of wrapped that up. But he briefly touched upon the NWO, and I'm pretty sure he's going to do one, if not has already done one. But here's the thing, as cool as the NWO was, and believe it or not, I was one of the people that it actually took a while when it first happened to really uh, you know get converted over to NWO when it happened. And when I mean slowly converted, it's like at first I just was one of those fans. So like I didn't like the NWO, but as time went on, they started to grow on you, and it, in a sense, the group felt very organically real, if that makes any sense. I mean, basically, these guys felt like outsiders, despite they were competing in WCW. They were trying to at first establish it as its own entity, and it's like you never knew who was going to jump over to the group because well, they don't want to get beat up anymore. Hey, there's more opportunity, stuff like that. You never knew. So basically, and just straighten that out there for a second. There we go. Basically, it was like one of those situations to where you had to tune in every week to see what was happening. But one of the things a lot of people talk about this year, believe it or not, is 1996 of this month. Yeah, this month. OTRS Central talked about it. I think Wrestling with Regret talked about it. The Lexman, I think, has talked about it. Social Injustice Warriors talked about it, I believe. Well, he did recently. Everybody has touched upon this, even though technically it's been 23 years. Yeah. 25 years won't really hit until about 2021. Anyway. Everybody still talks about this because of the fact that I think I don't know, I guess it just suddenly there was a, as soon as the date hit, it's like all of a sudden, people are starting to talk about the impact, and man, and basically looking back at the fact that, man, it's been that long. It's been over 20 years now since this happened. But here's the thing. I believe honestly that as big of an impact as Bash at the Beach 1996 made, especially with its conclusion, as much of an impact as it made, not just on WCW, but on the wrestling business as a whole, and basically allowed WCW to really dominate the Monday Night Wars. I think WWF could have benefited as well. I really do. It took them about a year or so to kind of acknowledge impact situations, developments, and all that happening in other organizations. But I think that at the WWF at the time played their cards right. I think if they would have acknowledged what happened in Dayton, Ohio, I think if they would have done that, acknowledged Hogan, turning on the group, turning on the fans, aligning himself with these former WWF stars Ramon and Diesel and creating this new group. I think if they would have acknowledged it, yeah, I would have put more attention on WCW, but it would have put attention on them, because you could play along, even if WCW didn't know they could do it. But if WWF had played the cards right and acknowledged what happened on the WCW pay-per-view at Bash at the Beach of that year, they could have played along with the idea of who in the WWF will jump over to this group down south that's trying to take over WCW and mostly the world of professional wrestling. You could play that up that angle within the company. You could have questions of, okay, will Brian Adams, like when Crush left the WWF and showed up in WCW as under his real name Brian Adams, and was part of the NWO. WCW acknowledged his reputation. Now, what's funny is, like I said, if WWF would have played their cards right at the time, and they seem to slowly be getting there, but if they played their cards right and kind of played along with the angle of not knowing who out of their company will run a jump ship down south. Imagine someone like Crush. He's 1 week he's on Raw, he's part of the Disciples of Apocalypse, and then the next week he's on Nitro under the Brian Adams name, and he's part of NWO. It doesn't matter, really. Honestly, folks, it wouldn't have mattered if, Adams, of course, was the leader of the brothers, the Disciples of Apocalypse. But what I'm trying to say is, imagine the impact that would have made, especially during the Attitude Era. You could have Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, or Michael Cole and Jerry Lawler, acknowledge that the reason Crush is not with Skulls, Chain, and 8-Ball anymore is because he jumped ship to the NWO down south, to that group, that organization. And even if they wanted to do a work shoot at that moment and say to that NWO, that New World organization group down south, it would have gotten people to pay attention to the product even more so. Because as they were gaining momentum, there was still that thought. There was still that thought that they could lose talent, not just to WCW, but mostly the NWO. You could still treat the NWO as a threat. And like I said, what I was trying to say, and I was just thinking about what I was going to say there moments ago, and I do apologize for that, because I am doing this unscripted. They don't even have to acknowledge that the NWO at that time is split into two different factions. Wolfpack and Hollywood. They could just acknowledge, the reason Adams is not here anymore with the Disciples of Apocalypse is he jumped over to that New World organization group down south. And basically it would get people to want to tune into both, because they wouldn't be sure, okay, who's jumping ship. Like, especially during the Attitude Era, it's like, who out of the Attitude Era is going to be next? Some people might say that would have helped WCW thrive a lot longer, and perhaps it would have, but I think, again, honestly, if WWF, WWE now, would have played their cards right, and kind of played along with the idea of maybe never knowing who out of their company legitimately would end up leaving, going to WCW, and thus by doing so, maybe upon their debut down there, become part of the NWO, I think it would have worked, because you would have, it's kind of, I guess you could say it'd be like a win-win, because you'd get viewers tuning in to see, okay, who would be next and who wouldn't be next. Like, they could see someone like, Jeff Jarrett, when he jumped again back to WCW with Vince Russo. True, the NWO wasn't as prominent or anything, but you play around with ideas like that, and it gets people thinking. For example, Owen Hart, God rest his soul, when he was playing the Blackheart gimmick, kind of an outsider as himself, the lone heart, the surviving heart, if you will. Imagine them playing up that gimmick and adding the idea that maybe Owen might want to leave and join Brett down south, and maybe Owen would be part of the NWO. Again, the possibilities, in my opinion, are endless. They really are. Of how the WWE, WWF at the time, had they played the cards right, could have really gotten the viewers, could have really helped the product out. It would still not help them at the time, win the war against WCW, who was dominating for those 83 weeks currently at that time. But still, it would have gotten people viewing the product more to see, okay, who out of the company would want to jump over there. And it's not just them either. When one thinks about it, ECW could have played along with this too. I mean, ECW was more extreme, more hardcore, more real than real could be sometimes, more mature. But even you could have had but even ECW could have played up the idea of who out of their group, how out of their organization will jump ship to WCW and by virtue become part of the NWO. I believe if both, if not one of them, would have played their cards right, or at least considered doing something like that, it would have worked. But what did WWE do instead? They instead decided to have their answer, as far as invasions are concerned, from an outside organization, they decided their answer would be the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, which on paper is a good idea, but I think honestly just failed in the long run, because basically they didn't plan it out right. All they did was basically decided to have Jim Cornette, I guess, get in contact with his friends in the NWA, Caluso and all them, and basically start something up. But again, I think it just failed because they didn't plan it. I think it was just something WWE wanted to do on the fly to maybe establish a working relationship with the NWA at the time, but also kind of have their answer in a reverse kind of way of an outside group invading. But it failed. So, in my opinion, I know it sounds like I'm rambling, but I think, in my honest opinion, had they played the cards right, and even, like I said, considered doing it, if they considered just one iota, this is a hot angle going on down south, what if we played along with it, especially with maybe some of the men and women that might be leaving our company to go down there, or even not, like let's say, like I said, with the case of Owen, played around with the idea of whether yay or nay, especially if someone like I said, God rest his soul, Owen, being considered like the lone heart, the outsider of WWE, if you will, I think it could have really helped the viewership. Like I said, maybe not as much during the startup point, back in 96 and throughout 97 and parts of 98, but I think it would have helped it substantially. I think it would have helped them gain some viewership, because then you would not only have your established WWE stars going back and WWE viewers, I should say, going back and forth, But you would have that WCW core audience going back and forth as well, because they'd be like, okay, I want to see who out of the thing, because you'd have them tuning into Raw, wondering, okay, who out of this group of wrestlers will be the next to jump ship? Is this person going to show up next week in NWO colors? Is that person going to show up? And the same again with ECW in a sense. I think if they would have both, if not one of them, would have considered doing that, it would have helped the viewership up, and maybe even the ratings. You know, like I said, maybe not as much at first, but it would have helped it out substantially, in a sense to where, it would have been a win-win-win if you look at all three. Look at all three companies. It would have been a triple win for all three of them. But we'll never know. But again, that's just speculation on my part. It's just speculation of what they could have done had they thought about it and considered doing it. But what do you guys think? Comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about my speculation on what they could have done. And I'll talk to y'all later.